The going to pivot from comedy to something that's not related to comedy in your.
I'll be the judge of that.
In your introduction. William Buckley, most people obviously will know of, but you talk about William Buckley in conjunction with another conservative thinker named Albert J. Nock, who many people may not have heard of. Who was Nock, and why is he relevant, and how does he fit into your discussion of these writers today?
Well, Albert J. Nock, for a lot of libertarians and conservatives of a certain generation, is the template, right? I mean, he is the ideal sort of intellectual stranger in a strange land who was never corrupted by giving a damn about having any influence whatsoever, right? He was, in many ways, an anarchist rather than a conservative or a libertarian, at least in some of his sensibilities. He worked for, I'm spacing the name, was it the Masses? He worked for a bunch of the great old right, which really has no meaning in today's context, publications. He was a friend of William F. Buckley Sr., Bill Buckley's dad, and his argument was basically that the world's going to hell. There's really nothing you can do about it. Most people don't think about politics seriously, and all you can do is stand up for what you believe in and write what you believe, and the only influence you will have is that you are feeding what he called the remnant, which were this irreducible core of right-thinking, virtuous people, the moral substratum of society. And they could be anywhere out there. And these were the people that were sort of the feedstock that were going to fuel the counter-revolution and the revival, the restoration of society. And there's a famous Albert J. Nock Society whose members never meet, and Nock's writing is just it's incredible stuff. It's really wonderful stuff. He writes like a figure out of science fiction, one of these immortals who's seen everything, done everything. Every new idea, he'll remind you why it was old, because the mandarins of medieval China had the same policy about their granaries or whatnot, and it's wonderful stuff, but he was fundamentally wrong on the basic question of whether you can make a difference. And one of the things I think that conservatives are right for rejecting in Nock is this sort of cold, dismal fatalism that says it's all a slippery slope and it's never going to get better. In so many places and in so many metrics, things are better than they used to be because conservatives actually believed they could change things.
And Buckley was fundamental in that.
That's right. Buckley is the guy who took a lot of the sort of Aristotelian and ornamental ideas in Nock and the way of looking at the world from an outsider, but then he applied it as a way of activism, as a way of meliorism, of changing the world. And if the famous line from Buckley in the first issue of National Review is, "Sometimes you must stand athwart history yelling stop," Nock's motto might have been, "Sometimes you must sit in a comfortable chair athwart history, talking amongst friends, drinking scotch, whispering stop," right? And Buckley took the fight to the world and made a huge difference as a result. And one of the things that I think is very healthy about today's generation of young conservatives is they don't have that kind of fatalism. They don't think it's not worth having the good fight.
The one last question for you. I want to come back to something that you were talking about at the outset. There are some folks who allege that one problem with the conservative movement today is that it's largely indistinguishable from the Republican Party, and that there's not an openness to debate, dissent, new ideas, really old ideas, whatever they may be. What light does this book shed on that debate?
Well, look, first of all, I think if you're looking in the immediate recent history, I think there's some merit to the criticism. I do think that the conservative movement got too cozy with the Bush administration. I don't think it was because conservatives had become corrupted by Mandan and politics and K Street and all of that, nonsense. I think what it was mostly was a certain sense that most of the objections that conservatives had to the Bush administration were secondary to the imperative of the Iraq War. That trying to tear down a president amidst a war was a bad practice. And it caused a lot of people to make some compromises. There was also a secondary thing where a lot of conservatives bought into a certain analysis that said the Republican Party is doomed demographically unless it updates itself, which was the whole point of compassionate conservatism. And there may be some merit into that analysis or that fear, but that is not necessarily the argument that conservatives should take to heart. I mean, the reason, what you want is a healthy tension between the conservative movement and the Republican Party. The Republican Party is merely the more conservative of the two parties, and so it has the natural support of conservatives. But it is not the repository of the principles of the conservative movement. The first job of Republicans of any party is to get elected. The first job of conservatives is to make the arguments as they see them. And in terms of this book, look, one of the great cliches of American political life today, and for the last 30 years, is that conservatives are hidebound and dogmatic and closed-minded, and we need a truckload of brand just to crack a smile. And I think this has it almost exactly wrong. It's liberalism that is dogmatic. It is liberalism, for all the talk from liberals these days about how Republicans need new ideas, these are the same people who see the New Deal as the touchstone for their entire agenda. And it seems to me complaining about how Republicans are too loyal to the 1980s when you're loyal to the 1930s is a bit of a problem. But that aside, liberalism's dogma is settled. Dogma comes from the Greek, which means seems good. It is something that you don't question, you just take for granted as established and right and normal. And liberalism has decided that the government should do good where it can, when it can, whenever it can. And invariably the debates on the left have to do with pragmatic transactions about power and how to apply power. On the right, there is this fundamental dogmatic schism that runs along the right that you find evidence of throughout this book. That basically goes like this, is that there's a trade-off. You know this stuff very well about Frank Meyer and all the rest of the arguments about fusionism. There is conservatives in the Anglo-American tradition, which is the relevant tradition, not the European continental tradition. In the Anglo-American tradition, conservatives value freedom and virtue, or liberty and order. There are lots of different ways you can slice these two things, but it's basically the good of the national entity versus the rights of the individual. And this is very much an American schism too. I'm not saying it doesn't exist outside of conservatism, but in conservatism, we are constantly debating where this line is drawn. And it's not merely a fight between conservatives and so-called libertarians, although that tracks it very well. It's also a fight between, Irving Kristol, who was here for years and one of my heroes, he used to say that the great fight on the right was between those who are anti-state and those who are anti-left. In many ways, that sort of gets it. The people who are anti-state are more in the libertarian camp. The people who are anti-left say, look, government's not going anywhere. We might as well use it for conservative ends. And this is a debate that runs through the very heart of conservatism. And it is constantly being renewed and refreshed, which is why I think the arguments on the right are so much more interesting, precisely because new facts cause people to revisit these old principles over and over again. I'm not saying it never happens on the liberal side of things, but if you read the intellectual writing of liberals, it is suffused with this narrow emphasis on pragmatism and on holding power and building coalitions. And that's all fine in politics and all the rest, but I think the better and more interesting arguments now and into the future are on the right, and I think you can find evidence of that with the young people in this book.
Well, the book is it's filled with interesting debates. It's called Proud to be Right, Voices of the Next Conservative Generation. It's edited by my guest today, Jonah Goldberg. Jonah, thanks for being here. You can find this in bookstores now and on Amazon. Good luck with the book.
Thank you very much, Nick.